Okay, students, so we have talked about some of the current status, the pros and cons of going into this profession, some of the stereotypes we have to deal with as professionals. But here's your formal invitation. You're officially invited to join the family of movement professionals, people who work connected with other people in our profession to help make people's lives healthier, more mobile, more active, and in general better. One of the things we want to do first is learn what our family tree is. So looking at, if you think of a family tree, and we think of family structure, we have a grandparent. And this is kind of like the name of the entire field, the entire profession. So an older name, like the name of our program is an older name. It used to be called physical education. Before the 1960s, pretty much everything that involved movement was physical education. Ages, settings, competitive, non-competitive, definitely was a focus on youth, but it did involve all aspects of sport, movement, and physical training. There's definitely a lack of professional credibility if we think of some of the movements that we've had in our history, which we'll look at later in this class, but physical culture for sure had a presence. And then we also see and have heard the words kinesiology, and it's essentially the study of human movement, promotion of human movement. And so since the 60s, we've seen some growth in using this term kinesiology. And so a lot of people, I'll just say like, oh, I work in kinesiology, and like they'll understand I'm doing things with exercise and with the body and with fitness. So that's kind of a general accepted term. So if we think of this, the grandparents, they're like the entire profession as a whole, broad, big picture, everything stems down from them. And then if you think of their children, parents, these are actual sub areas of kinesiology or physical education, however you want to say it. So we have actual school-based physical education. So this is an educational process. There's curriculum, there's assessment. It uses physical activity to help enhance skillfulness, knowledge, beliefs, leads hopefully to kids being more active, better wellness. And then we now have exercise science. Think of that as a child of kinesiology or broad, big physical education. And so exercise science is an analysis of movement to often improve it, whether it's for health or for sport, and then or even for understanding. So that's in terms of research and just knowledge of movement. Exercise science is heavily influenced by the other sciences, whereas physical education is heavily influenced by our educational world, educational psychology. And then we see sport. It's organized, competitive physical activity where there's rules, there's structure, they're agreed upon, there's governing bodies. We see it for all levels. And then we see that athletics is sport, but with a higher level of structure and a higher level of skillfulness. It's not going to be as inclusive as general sport could be. It's usually for those higher level performers and movers. And so we think of these three parents or that second generation, physical education in schools, exercise science, and sport, heavily influenced by related fields. So the hard sciences, all of them are listed there. So that's why you'll see like in that general education group of classes, anatomy, physiology, physics, math, we're going to see those in some of your plans of study. Social sciences absolutely will influence us because we're dealing with people and how they move and getting them to move and how culture impacts our behaviors and our wants and our values. And so 100% we're going to see coursework and influence in our profession and what we do by social sciences. And especially even more now, we're seeing a major influx from the physical therapy world. So different space, they're on a different track, a different line, but from a rehab standpoint, we're going to have individuals that are going to come to us from right out of physical therapy who aren't going to be ready to jump into sport performance or sport. And so we're going to need to know a little bit about their field of how do they bring people back from an injury or from a surgery or into a higher quality of movement, and then how we can expand upon it. And we absolutely see influence in business and in law. So if we think of in sport, how much the role that law and communications and marketing management is so necessary. If anyone is going to own a business, all of these are completely essential. And even to some extent in the education space, in physical education. from a legal standpoint, understanding the role of schools, and even from a marketing standpoint, we have to promote, even though we're in the school day, we have to convince kids to be active, parents to volunteer and support the programs that we're running in schools. And so that takes some of the strategies that we're going to be pulling from the business world as well. So if we think of grandparents, this first generation is old physical education, kinesiology. Then we have second generation, we see school physical education, exercise science, and then sport. Now we get into the third generation. So think of these as the children or maybe the grandchildren of the field, of those big ones. And so we have a lot of different spaces, and these, you'll notice, are kind of familiar. Most of our classes that you're going to be taking are going to help you tap into the subdisciplines and the areas that we're pulling from. These are areas that can be studied exclusively. There's master's, PhD programs in all of these spaces. There's research in all of these spaces, experts in all of these spaces, but making sure we are well-rounded to work in the sport performance space and in the fitness space, even in physical education. Pedagogy is the art and science of teaching. We need to be able to know what's happening in our related spaces, because even if we're working in fitness, or if we're working in sport performance, all of these are going to come into play. So we're going to do this activity actually in class. And so I have a little challenge for you once we get there that's related to some scenarios that are going to be happening within these subdisciplines. You can look forward to that at our next class meeting. But why do we have all of these groups? Why do we have exercise psychology and sports psychology? And why do we have motor development and exercise physiology? Why don't we just keep it all together in exercise science or in kinesiology? Why we have this differentiation is that there's enough difference and uniqueness within each of those subdisciplines to have their own academic focus, preparation, to have their own certifications. They all have their own research areas, even though they do cross into each other. There's professional organizations that support management of professionals, certifications of professionals in these fields, and they all have conferences as well. So the big challenge is, if we think of the kids, all of these subdisciplines, right now, just because of their growth, they're all fairly new, coming up in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So that's not the oldest. Their history isn't very strong. They don't always get along. Or sometimes it feels like a feeding frenzy for attention or for money or for prestige. Like some professions or some subdisciplines are going to feel marginalized compared to others. And really, in reality, all of these subdisciplines, the kids in our little scenario, they need to work together. They are interconnected. And even though they have separate professional organizations, for them to think they can each operate in silos or alone and still be effective to help people isn't accurate. And so no one subdiscipline is more important than the other. So physical education, pedagogy, teaching isn't more important or less important than exercise psychology or sports psychology. What makes one professional, this is someone who works in that profession better, that is something we can identify. So even though one profession itself is no worse or better than the other, professionals can definitely be worse or better than each other. And so we really look to how well they uphold our overall mission, how much they are actually committed to their art and science. So that's continued growth, continued learning, changing. That's the big thing, not just doing things the same old way. Continuing to learn, collaborating with other subdisciplines. That is one of the things that makes a professional better than others. Then we have this idea of cousins. The allied fields are sometimes known as allied health. And so that's where we get into health. So public health, community health, looking into all aspects. Here's just a few areas. It's not just the physical body, but looking into all aspects of health and wellness, disease prevention, education, and all of these areas. Recreation and leisure is considered an allied field to us. So that's where we get more into the park and recreation spaces. Think of like national parks, community parks, having opportunities to move in more of these leisure settings as opposed to fitness or sport or performance. And see, these are really any self-chosen activities to revitalize someone's body and spirit is what we consider recreation. Play falls into this space. Dance is considered one of our related and allied fields. We see lots of reasons for dance. For a lot of us, I know it's personal expression, it's social reasons why we engage. And our final thought here, again, back to our mission. So the fact that all people have this right to good health and the opportunity to move, to be physically active through their lifespan. It's our job, no matter what profession we enter, no matter what subdisciplines we choose to study at different times in our life, and how we connect the dots and create jobs and careers for ourselves amongst these professions and amongst these different fields or professional areas, is we want to uphold this right that people deserve the opportunity to be active. We want to do no harm, and we want to make sure to continue our own learning to make sure we evolve as our population evolves as well.